So as I think about getting ready to present the informing instruction presentation to teachers, just really, making sure they understand and we have the opportunity to go over the agenda, um, and really just kind of learning where teachers are in this group. Every group of teachers is in a different place. So really just knowing, what they would like to see on the agenda as they think about how they can utilize the information from map growth to inform their instruction, and what questions they have. I'd also like to see in the session how they feel they are when it comes to the math growth data, and really just, where do they fall in that continuum is going to be nice information as well. Um, so I can, this will guide me to help me prioritize and guide the learning throughout the session. It's also nice to be able just to hear their thinking. So sharing their thinking with me um, is helpful, so I know how to adjust as well as I think about, utilizing the time wisely. One of the things that I would like to point out is that I always preface how beneficial I find the needs assessment survey prior to the sessions from those stakeholders, because it really provides some valuable information for me about where my learners are before they attend the sessions. So I would definitely want to do this component with those who are registered for this session. So again, we're focusing on, for this session, informing instruction, and then going into differentiating instructions. So how can you use math growth to help guide those decisions about how you're going to differentiate the instruction? And then that responsive planning for instruction and going over those resources to help support teachers is going to be helpful as well. So I really want the participants to be able to walk away with understanding how they can use math growth to support differentiation, to support instructional decisions. So when we're thinking about flexible grouping, curriculum compacting, where you can intervene on behalf of students, and how to utilize that information to plan for responsive instructions. So not only utilizing math growth information, but also thinking about how they can use their formative assessment to help guide those ideas, plans they have for how they're going to respond to instruction as well. I also want to make sure to highlight the resources that are available to support instructional planning. So there are links here that I would definitely want to make sure to guide teachers to: the Padlet, the normative data piece, and thinking about growth norms and how they can utilize the mean from each of those grade levels, adding and subtracting the standard deviation to really help kind of have an idea of what that range is for RIT scores as they think about each of those grade levels and each of those interim assessment components as well. Also, comparative data is also very helpful to share, just kind of revisit, again, kind of activate their prior knowledge that they may have about some of these pieces. The teacher toolkit, and then the instructional areas resource as well. So really just thinking about how I want to make sure to communicate how each of these can help support informing their instruction. So just recommending they download copies of these. I might have, the workbook, obviously, as part of a resource for teachers during this session. So one of the things that's always very interesting is really just seeing where people are in their understanding of differentiation. I think is going to be huge. So really going into, what differentiation is based on Tomlinson's work, and then also making sure that it's clear about what it's not as well, based upon Tomlinson's work too. So having them engage in the activity for the T-chart to make sure to uncover any misconceptions that others may have about differentiation, and really clearing up what it should look like, sound like, and what is it not, is going to be important in this session as well. And making sure to reference Tomlinson's work on connecting scaffolding to differentiation is another key piece here as well. So really thinking about allowing access to the content, and and really thinking through what it means to differentiate for students no matter where they fall in the continuum is going to be very important. So they really need to have a plan, so that responsive planning is going to be very important. And in thinking about Tomlinson's work, really just helping them to understand, how teachers can differentiate. So really thinking, again, going back to Tomlinson's work about differentiation by content, product, or process, and really just thinking about students' readiness, what they have as far as formative data on students and other data points, student learning profiles, and what their interests are as well, can help support the development of the differentiation for each students. And understanding the best practices for differentiated instruction, where they should start, things they should consider, and be thinking about the task that they're putting in front of students or the materials that they're going to be utilizing. And again, highlighted in green there, as MAP always prefaces, is that math growth is one data point, but just really making sure to look at other multiple sources, including their formative assessment data. So really looking at areas of strength and concern as they engage in responsive planning. And as a reminder that, NWEA MAP prefaces, that this math growth results are really help to support terms or unit planning, not really utilized based upon individual students. Also, it's going to be really important to have participants reflect on and respond to the questions, and ask participants to share their ideas and responses with colleagues or others. I think this is going to be very helpful as I think about, different teachers coming from different districts, that this sharing component is going to be important, and it's going to add to the helpful insights. So really thinking about how they can utilize math growth to identify trends and patterns, identify strengths, areas of concern, recognize academic diversity. So that's really where the differentiation comes in, and thinking about class and groups. And also looking at how they can utilize math growth to examine proficiency projections on high stakes tests, such as the state assessment. And then really getting into next, after we engage in utilizing math growth for differentiation, is to really think about how they can support their instruction. So getting into, for some, we may need to visit the class breakdown reports and really go back and look at how this can support their instructional decisions. How will they be utilizing this data in the class breakdown report? And then think about the report's portfolio, RIT ranges, students, how they're placed based upon those RIT ranges is another key piece there. And then making sure to explain to them how this can be used to identify instructional areas of strength, areas of focus, and readiness levels for students. And really looking at those U.S. norms is also going to be a good point here too. And even utilizing the comparative data, which was one of those resources I think will be helpful too, as they think about how students performed in each of those grade levels, and then the interim assessment periods as well, and how they can utilize this to help impact their instructional decisions. But as I think about the class breakdown, really revisiting this and having them examine these screenshots on the next few slides, especially if they're not able to access their own class breakdown reports. This may be an issue for some teachers, so just making sure to share those helpful screenshots is going to be beneficial as well. Focusing on students, which RIT band do those students fall in for those instructional areas, asking questions for, how might you use this information to help in planning instruction for particular students, and how you're going to monitor student progress. And then I want to give them time to explore the class breakdown reports. So this will be, what data do the class breakdown reports provide? Again, how are they going to be utilizing this data to help inform their instructional planning? As they look at the RIT range scores and how they're aligned to the blocks of skills in the learning continuum, Also, make sure that they understand how they can utilize the class breakdown reports to identify instructional areas of strength, areas of focus, and readiness for students as well. And then for the section on responsive planning, I think what's in the workbook is be very helpful. So really looking at it through the lens of a term or unit planning, um, really breaking those steps down for teachers and having a document such as this is going to be helpful. So identifying those desired outcomes as they look at that unit or term, what assessments, formative assessments, the learning activities, and the resources that align with that content. And, their curriculum maps could be very beneficial to help support this process. What are they seeing as they look at multiple data points? What are the trends and patterns that they're seeing in their data? And as I think about what they're currently seeing, what formative assessment strategies might they use to verify the learning needs of those students? And also look at, how are students performing? What do we notice when we look at the patterns and trends? Um, where might students need scaffolding, and what strategies would they utilize to support scaffolding? And I think the second part on page 5 of the workbook is also going to be helpful. So really helping them to have some additional ideas on instructional considerations, progression, coherence, and clarity, the pacing, the text complexity, and just really thinking about where students are in their own essential skills as they look at the data, and what is identified as the level of complexity and rigor for that standard is also going to be helpful. And so after they have the opportunity to go through that process of responsive planning, really just having an opportunity to have some discussion on these 3 talking points, I think will be helpful for me as a facilitator, is to be able just to see where teachers are in this process after they've had the opportunity to delve into those multiple resources, look at patterns and trends in the data, look at their unit plan of study, or the term itself, depending on the grade level. Just really being able to have an opportunity for them to share, I think will be helpful for this part. And then thinking through, how do they respond and adjust in real time? So using lesson plans with formative assessments, always knowing where students are on a daily basis from those formative assessment practices is going to be helpful. And really getting into the practice of looking at that data to help them plan for differentiation before the lesson, how they're going to monitor and adjust during the lesson, and then what is their plan on making sure they have that time to reflect on the lesson, how it went, what adjustments need to take place as they look ahead to the next day. And in this next section, just really making sure they understand the resources that are available to them. And so as I look at the workbook, those links are there to the Learning Center, to the Formative Assessment Center, the responsive planning piece, I think is going to be helpful. Being able to have a document that they can come back to really, determine, what's the focus of instruction as they look at the standards, the rigor and complexity of the standards, the learning targets, what is the success criteria, what are their plans for assessment as they look at math growth data and the learning continuum, putting that information in there. And then also, again, as MAP always prefaces, is to make sure to use other multiple data sources. So what are those formative assessments that they've also want to connect to their math growth data? And then how are they going to adjust to support the learning needs of students? The other resource I thought might be helpful to point out as I'm highlighting resources is in the workbook, the planning forward piece. So as they think about the learning activities they have an opportunity to engage in, the conversations that they've had with other participants, is really think about how they can share this learning, because this would be beneficial, I think, for their teacher-based teams to be able to engage in this process together, or even as a building in a district. And then can we utilize MAP growth data along with other multiple sources of data to help guide our plans responsive planning, and then thinking about how we're going to utilize that data daily to inform and adjust our next steps to support student learning needs.